Hey guys, Mulligan here, and welcome to part 2 of my Omens of the Past card review. We're covering time cards today, in my quest to complete the preview videos that I did for some cards in the set a few weeks back. Before we get started, for those that didn't watch my preview videos, I will only be talking about the cards as far as viability for ranked play. If the card isn't viable for ranked play at all, then I will touch on its draft viability. And I'll be going through each of the single factions first and then cover the multi-factions over the next couple of weeks. There's a lot to cover, so let's jump in. The first card we're going to be looking at is called Aspirant. This is a 1 power 1/1 requiring 1 time influence to play. Has Overwhelm and Life Force. When you gain health, called Aspirant gets +1/+1. So a pretty nice 1-drop that time got given what's in the rest of the set. I'm really starting to think Xenon tokens might actually be the move to make in Time Shadow for the new metagame, and it's just being overshadowed by the idea of making Xenon control viable, which still might not work out, mind you. The whole theme of Xenon is that they're a cult anyway. Since this gets buffed with every instance of health gain no matter the amount, you get a nice curve for a Xenon token style deck with a Turn 2 Temple Scribe, Turn 3 Ion the Abductor, Turn 4 Catcher the Devoted or Xenon Obelisk, and Turn 5 Blood Call Invoker. Lethrai Falchion or Healer's Cloak could find their way into the deck as well, even though they haven't so far. And you can't forget Vara's Favor either. Xenon control decks that want to use Life Force will not want this card, as it's too low impact initially and doesn't fit a control deck's game plan. Control usually wants defensive early game units, and this is clearly an aggressive unit since it also has Overwhelm. Others have said Combre can pull off the health gain aggressive / mid-range strategy too with Spirit Guide and Combre Healer as the 3-drops, and I have to agree. Awakened Student, while it doesn't gain you health, is also the best 2-drop in the game currently, at least in my opinion. People have also tried this with Shepherd's Horn in Elysian decks, another card which we'll be talking about later. I personally haven't tried that yet though. Of course, there are the 3-color flavor versions of token decks, but only the ones with Time and Shadow in their color pie will want this. I'm thinking Fire Time Shadow or maybe even Time Justice Shadow, although we haven't really seen anyone pull off the latter combination in a token style deck. Something like Shimmer Pack won't want this card. But yeah, I think this is a solid constructed card in the right deck. Next card we're going to be looking at is Envelop. This is a 1 power fast spell requiring 1 time influence to play. You put an attacking enemy unit into its owner's hand. I see no reason to play this over Teleport, despite the cheaper cost when it comes to constructed. As far as draft goes, I see no reason to play this over Teleport, despite the cheaper cost. Moving on. Next up is Excavation Assistant. This is a 1 power 0/3 requiring 1 time influence to play. It has flying, and when it comes into play, you look at the top card of your deck and you may put it on the bottom. So the card is pretty good as an early game blocker. A lot of things do remove it, like Torch and Suffocate, but you already got value with the quote-unquote scry mechanic that Eternal borrowed from Magic the Gathering. I really could see this being played in Chalice decks since you get to buff this twice if it's still around, and a 4/7 can be tough to get through without something like Vanquish or Slay. None of the hard removal is exactly efficient by that point. I can't see this fitting in much else though. Despite it being a defensive unit, other control decks will probably want something more impactful, like more removal, more win conditions, or more pure card draw. But I like it. I think it's a pretty good card. Next up is Wandering Wisp. This is a 1 power 1/1 requiring 1 time influence to play. When you have 5 time influence at the start of your turn, Wandering Wisp gets +1/+1 for each card in your hand. So this is in line for the best art in the whole set. I feel like there are better 1-drop options in Time now if you really want them though. I say that because it's really hard to get 5 influence in any faction, but I guess if any of them have it the easiest, it's Time. 1/1 isn't exactly hard to kill though, since you typically won't have 5 influence until the mid game at the earliest, even with all of Time's power fixing. I think Cult Aspirant and even Excavation Assistant are overall better, though both fit in fewer decks. In the case of 2 or more faction decks, you're probably going to find a better option for a 1-drop in just about any faction. Next up is Forgotten Find. This is a 2-power spell requiring 1 time influence to play, and you play 2 power cards from your void depleted. Very strange card. I don't think it's good at all right now, but only because it has so few applications currently. The cards this has synergy with that I can think of are Stonescar Excavator and Quarry. And Fire and Shadow have never been known for power manipulation, especially manipulation that works from the void. I am curious to see what people will come up with in the future though. Next up is Oasis Seeker. This is a 2-power 3/2 unit requiring 1 time influence to play. When Oasis Seeker attacks, you gain 1 health. I really wish the stat line was flipped on this card. This being a 2/3 would have been much better since you could attack into most early game board states without much trouble. Despite this, people are playing it in their Xenon Life Force decks. I just think it's a bit overrated. As a 3/2, this trades down against a ton of 1-drops, so I doubt this will continue to see play in Constructed and will be relegated to a 2-drop filler in Draft. I could definitely be wrong though. Next up is going to be Sand Viper. This is a 2-power 1/2 unit requiring 1 time influence to play. It has Deadly, and it has an ultimate where you pay 6 to give Sand Viper +2/+2. So this is the second card in the cycle of units with 6-power ultimates that buff themselves. I personally like this one since deadly units are always annoying to get past, especially the smaller, cheaper ones. Because deck slots are tight in Constructed, I doubt this sees play there since while it can compete for a 2-drop slot, I think there are just better options overall. This is solid in Draft though. Not a snap pick, but I'd take this if I'm in time and need a 2-drop to fill my curve out. Next up is Sandstorm. This is a 2-power fast spell requiring 1 time influence to play. Units can't fly this turn. Draw a card. So when you take the word Titan away, you lose a 5/6 with Endurance, but you pay half the cost and draw a card. So this is a nice trick to get their flyers in combat if all your stuff is bigger than theirs, but it's grounded. I think this sees play far more in Draft though, and I don't think it's a snap pick there either. I doubt Constructed decks have space for this, but I could be wrong. Next up is Trail Runner. This is a 2-power 1/3 unit requiring 1 time influence to play, and it has Charge. Draft Chaff, which is unfortunate because I like the art on this card. There's no way this sees play in Constructed though, since a charge unit with this low of a strength stat is not desirable in any card game I've ever played. So it's a 2-drop filler in Draft at best. Next up is Xenon Initiation. This is a 2-power spell requiring 1 time influence to play. You give one of your units +1/+1 and Killer. I'm not sure what to make of the future of this card in Constructed. Obviously this compares to Predator's Instinct, and it comes down to whether or not players think the extra 1 cost is worth giving a unit +1/+1. So far though, people seem to think it's worth the extra cost and have been using it, saying it's better than Instinct in every way. Those same people are also actually running it with Xenon Obelisk in their decks, which I personally thought the 2 cards would not be seen together. I thought that decks not running Obelisk would use this card, and decks that do run Obelisk would stick with Instinct. We'll see how things continue to develop though. Next up is Amber Ring. This is a 3-power relic requiring 1 time influence to play. Once per turn you may pay 3 to play a 1/1 Explorer. So the second in the cycle of rings we got in this set. This one is also middle of the road. Paying 3 for a 1/1 seems like too much, but the fact that it's a relic and you can do it every turn can make up for it. You can chump block with them if nothing else. I think only token decks would want this card. I don't know what they would cut, but I'm sure they can find something to take out to fit in 2 copies or so of this. I don't think it fits in anything else. Next up is Barracks Familiar. This is a 3-power 1/1 unit requiring 1 time influence to play. It has flying and warp. It also has +1 maximum power. I covered this card already in my second preview video for Omens of the Past, so I won't go into detail here. Basically, my stance hasn't changed. It's a bad secret pages, and the 1/1 body that is a bad blocker doesn't make up for it, since it has to stay alive to do anything. A Dinosaur Ramp would have to be really good for this thing to be considered in a deck. This might be a mainstay in Warp decks, but as is, I've seen the card exactly once so far in Constructed. So the next card we're going to be looking at is Disciplined Amanera. This is a 3 power 2/2 unit requiring 1-time influence to play. She has Life Force, and when you gain health, Disciplined Amanera gets +1/+1. So this is the definition of a fringe card, I feel. The only deck this will be played in is the Xenon Cult Tokens Life Force style deck. But they might want Dawnwalker over this depending on how they've got their deck built. If you only run smaller units that rely on buffs from Xenon Obelisk though, I could see the deck playing this card. You usually won't want this in draft unless you picked up a bunch of the good health gain cards, which will probably be very rare. Next up is Evelina Valley Searcher. This is a 3 power 2/2 unit requiring 1-time influence to play. When you play an Explorer, including Evelina, dinosaurs in your hand get +1/+1. So I love this card, mainly because of the art. It's very charming. The effect is cool too, though this pigeonholes Evelina to a dinosaur-themed deck. Combining dinosaurs with explorers could actually be a thing, though this gets me thinking that design-wise, there won't be a lot printed for either tribe in future sets, at least when compared to others if we're supposed to be playing them in the same deck. I could be wrong though. She'll be good if someone comes up with a good dinosaur explorer list, whether it's in Xenon, Elysian, or somewhere else. Next up is Shepherd's Horn. This is a 3 power relic requiring 1-time influence to play. Your cards with Overwhelm cost 1 less. When you play a card with Overwhelm, you gain 3 health. So I'm very excited for this card, mainly for Elysian midrange, but there are other decks this could fit in as well. The Xenon token deck I keep mentioning could run this if they are willing to run bigger units like Dawnwalker and other 5-strength guys like Sandstorm Titan, and maybe even Copper Conduits. Historically though, Elysian has always had access to the best Overwhelm units like False Prince and Cerso. This would also likely mean that they would want to run Cult Aspirant, since it is similar to Awakened Student, possibly along with Temple Scribe to give more ways to gain health. It just feels like this card should be used in Xenon, but it will end up being used in Elysian. We'll see though. So next up is Archive Curator. This is a 4 power 1/4 unit requiring 1-time influence to play. She has flying, and when she comes into play, you may silence another unit. I still can't believe Direwolf gave Time access to a flyer with silence, and it's a solid one at that. This immediately went into my Elysian midrange list. I think it's overall better than Praxis Displacer, even though, yes, there are situations where Praxis Displacer is better than this card, like against some Rakano unit with Deep Forge plate equipped. The 1/4 stats can be underwhelming, but at least it dodges Torch if nothing else. So next up is Bolster. This is a 4 power fast spell requiring 2-time influence to play. You and your units get +2 health. It's back, but with a different name and completely different card text. For those that didn't know, the art on this card used to be on another card called Force Field, which, as you may have guessed, was in closed beta before being removed completely from the game when Eternal went into open beta. So Force Field used to have Power Surge and gave a unit or player additional health equal to the power spent. It never saw serious play in any constructed deck, and I don't even recall the card seeing play in draft either. I think Bolster is better since you get a board-wide buff of 2, including gaining 2 yourself, but it's still not good enough to see ranked play. My main issue is I think the cost is too high for the effect, when time-based decks are looking to do something more impactful on their turn 4 than hold up this fast spell. It might be a pretty nice combat trick for draft though. It's not a high pick by any means, however, and you probably won't put it in your draft deck if you don't have to. Next up is Camp Physician. This is a 4-power 2/2 unit requiring 1 time influence to play. She has Warp. When she comes into play, you gain 3 health. The card is bad overall, and the only deck I've seen this played in so far is those dedicated Praxis Warp decks, but she's pretty decent in that deck. Despite this having health gain, a 2/2 is too underpowered for Life Force decks to use this, in my opinion. In draft, I definitely stay away from this, as there are tons of better 4-drops in time, and it's harder to pull together a good Warp deck there. Next up is Snapping Brushstalker. This is a 4-power 5/4 unit requiring 2 time influence to play. When an enemy spell is played, put Snapping Brushstalker into your hand. So I'm glad this is a 5/4 and not bigger, because then this would be a trap card. The card text is a huge drawback because almost every deck runs cheap spells to bounce this back. It won't see serious play since there's plenty of competition in the 4-drop slot for time, and the tempo loss is just too much to play this. It's better in draft since the format tends to be more about units than spells, but I don't know by how much. So next up is Striped Arachnodon. This is a 4-power 4/4 unit requiring 2 time influence to play. It's an okay stat line for a 4-drop that is probably decent filler in draft and only draft. Moving on. Next up is Viper's Bite. This is a 4-power fast spell requiring 1 time influence to play. You give one of your units deadly. There is a point where you can pay too much for a fast spell, and between Death Strike and what we got in this set, I think the magic number is 4. If this costed 1, it would be very good. At 4 though, it's nearly unplayable and constructed. Probably better in draft depending on what your deck needs. Next up is Amaran Archaeologist. This is a 5-power 3/3 unit requiring 1 time influence to play. When he comes into play, you play a sigil of your choice from your deck depleted. So he's a higher costed Amber Acolyte that's still understated at this power cost. I don't think anyone will want this in constructed, especially now that we have waste On Infuser. She isn't strictly better than this card, but I think a 2/6 is way more useful than a 3/3 at that point of the game. And never mind that Justice has Martial Ironthorn if you're in that faction. In draft, I haven't been sad picking this up and using it in my deck, but I haven't been happy either. It's been pretty average for me so far in that format. Next up is Awakened Sentinel. This is a 5-power 3/5 unit requiring 1 time influence to play, has Endurance and Warp. Unplayable and constructed, except in Warp decks, and at best it's a French card there. However, this has been pretty solid for me in the drafts I've done so far. A 3/5 with Endurance can be tough to get past for ground units. You don't always feel bad about playing Jotun Warrior in Primal, and this is a clear upgrade if you're in time. Next up is Battle Tested Stranger. This is a 5-power 2/2 unit requiring 1 time influence to play. Strangers have +2/+2 while this is in play. Some of my favorite art from this set. As far as the card itself though, I don't see a reason to play this in a Stranger deck. I think you would rather have Determined Stranger because the cheaper cost outweighs the smaller buff you get, even if this one becomes a 4/4. With all the other Strangers in this set around this cost doing more impactful things, this just seems underwhelming. I'd play the 6-drop Stranger that gives all Strangers +3/+3 over this, if I have the influence in my deck to do it. So next up we're going to be looking at Beckoning Lumen. A 5-power 6/4 unit that requires 2 time influence to play. She has Life Force. At the end of your turn, if you gained health, draw a card. I also looked at this card in my second preview video for this set. My stance hasn't changed since there's so much incidental life gain attached to good cards in Eternal. In fact, I believe even more so that she's a good card in Constructed because she becomes a pretty good mini draw engine with Temple Scribe and Memory Dredger, where you end up drawing 2 cards every time Scribe dies, and you hit face with the Dredger. Not sure if the strategy has legs in Xenon Control, but we'll see. I think she'll find a home somewhere in Constructed, even if it's some 3-color build. Next up is Homebug Swarm. This is a 5-power spell requiring 2 time influence to play, and you play 3 1/1 Humbugs with flying. So people's opinions have been changing about this card to being generally more positive lately. Mine hasn't. I still think it's draft chaff. There's no Constructed deck I can see that would want this card except maybe go wide decks like Praxis Tokens and Shimmer Pack. Praxis Tokens has better things to do on turn 5 though, like Arcanum Monitor or burning something with Obliterate. Shimmer Pack's 5-drop slot is kinda bare, but this is very underwhelming at 5 cost. Even if you have Xenon Obelisk or Vault of the Praxis on the table and then curve into this. Turn 5 Marison's Disciple into Permafrost or holding that 1 power for Torch is still better in my opinion. I don't expect this to stick in Constructed at all. Even in Draft, I think you only pick it if you have no other choice. The art is hilarious and amazing all at the same time though. So next up is Time Weaver. This is a 5-power 3/4 unit requiring 2 time influence to play. When she comes into play, you double the cost of a card in the enemy player's hand. I love this card, mainly because you cast slow when she comes into play. I wish this was a 3/5 because then other people would consider playing this card, but I'm glad she's not a 3/3, otherwise I probably wouldn't brew with her at all. Her stat line is acceptable. Speaking of which, I think if you're playing this card, then you have to also be running slow in your deck. Otherwise, it's probably not worth it. I doubt many people will mess with this card though, and I can understand why. I'm just a fanboy of slow. What can I say? Next up is Waste on Infuser. This is a 5-power 2/6 unit requiring 2 time influence to play. She has Warp. While she's in play, your power cards have Warp. So we are on a roll. Another card I looked at in my second preview video for Omens of the Past a few weeks back. If you want full details on the cards I already looked at, feel free to check out that video. Anyway, the only thing that's changed is that this is seeing play in dedicated Warp decks that are actually turning out to be pretty decent, as well as some Xenon Control builds. I still fully expect to see a few copies of this in Big Combrate eventually though, to complement Martial Ironthorn and possibly Chalice decks. We'll see. I still think she's a good card. Next on the list is Pack Hunt. This is a 6-power spell requiring 1 time influence to play. Your units get +2/+2 this turn. Why? We have Synchronized Strike. Why? Next is Play to Goliath. This is a 6-power 7/5 requiring 2 time influence to play. And it has Overwhelm and Warp. Yet another card I looked at in my second preview video of this set. I won't go into full detail here, except I said the card wasn't terrible in itself, and I feel the same now. An Elysian mid-range list running this card got to the finals at the first ETS tournament where Omens was legal, but I just don't think it will stick in Constructed, even in Dinosaur decks, especially since they got more support from better cards than this one in this set. But it's a decent draft pick that I feel is better than Towering Terrazon, but some may disagree. It'll depend on what your draft deck needs. So next up is going to be Sentinels Might. This is a 6 power spell requiring 3 time influence to play. Has life force. Your units get a strength and health equal to the health you gained this turn. Additional strength and health equal to the health you gained this turn. Yet, this has potential to see play in the Xenon token life force decks. Even if you only gain 2 or 3 health, that can often be enough to win the game outright. Those style of decks tend to be mid-range as far as curves go, so I think they can fit this in. Now, this sounds crazy, but you might even be able to run a copy or 2 of this in Chalice with all the health gain in that deck. I'll be surprised if this doesn't see play in Constructed in any deck. Next on the list is Voyaging Lumen. This is a 6 power 5/5 unit requiring 1 time influence to play. He has life force. At the end of your turn, if you gained health, play a 1/1 Wisp. Less potential to see play than the previously mentioned Sentinels Might. It could still be a curve topper in those Xenon token life force decks, but he doesn't win you the game right away, which I imagine is what you want to be doing by turn 6. This provides chump blockers if nothing else. He's probably going to be relegated to a budget option though, if those decks pick up Sentinels Might. Maybe an okay pick and draft if you have any semblance of life gain and want a late game drop. Next up is Our Compaq. This is a 7 power 7/10 unit requiring 2 time influence to play. It has warp and it has ambush while it's on top of your deck. So I have seen this do serious work in warp decks. I also think it's the only deck this card will find a home in. Despite the stat line, I don't think it's quite strong enough to see play in any other deck. It reminds me of Predatory Carnosaur if it costed 7 and had more health. And that's only if you're able to warp this guy in. It's a pretty strong curve topper in draft for similar reasons as Carnosaur though. It's not a bad card overall. 10 health is very tough to get past without hard removal. And finally, we have Belching the Amos. An 8 power 6/6 unit requiring 1 time influence to play. When it comes into play, you gain 6 health. So the card name is hilarious, but I think we're getting ridiculous as far as how high we want our curve to go for life force decks. Obviously, you get beefy 6/6 tokens with Blood Call and Invoker on the table, but I think you are too close to Fantasyland if you're trying to put this in your constructed deck. Not a bad bomb in draft if your deck has the power base to support it. Unfortunately, since this costs 8, that is rare. And we are done with the time cards. For those that stuck around to the end, thanks so much for listening to my thoughts on this set of cards. Hopefully you enjoyed the content. If you want to check out more, feel free to look around my channel. I have a few Eternal series that I do, such as Eternal Errors, which I plan to be starting back up soon. But it's a pretty good resource if you want to avoid the misplays I made with certain decks. There's no deck text on this channel yet, but sometimes I do videos discussing what I've learned playing certain decks. But there's plenty of other Eternal content too. If you don't want to miss future videos, feel free to subscribe to the channel. If you like this video, feel free to hit the like button as well. Anyway, thanks again for taking time out of your day to watch this, and I'll see you all soon. Take care.